All right, Saagar, what's on your radar?
If there is a single thing I can identify which Trump screwed up most during coronavirus, it is really not even anything around policy. Instead, it was his general affect around it. He politicized and he polarized everything along the lines of himself, and he turned government policy in red and blue states into culture war issues that ignore the science around it. Opening up began a culture war thing. Then staying closed became one too. Many places closed schools to own the cons, and many people went out to drink at bars to own the libs. Science was damned a long time ago, chief among them by the scientists themselves, who made themselves explicitly political when they said nothing about protests and riots over the summer, but continued to lecture lockdown protesters and Trump rally-goers all the way up till Election Day. The consequences of that are immense. It is hurting the case for coronavirus vaccine, and the case for a rational way forward is eroding before our eyes. And the reason it's so frustrating is because we are finally here, people. Things are actually getting better. We have a shit ton of vaccines coming down the pipeline. President Biden even now says by the end of May, every American adult who wants one will get one. Let's take a listen to that again, because it really is remarkable.
We're now on track to have enough vaccine supply for every adult in America by the end of May. Let me say that again. When we came into office, the prior administration had contracted for not nearly enough vaccine to cover adults in America. We rectified that. About 3 weeks ago, we were able to say that we'll have enough vaccine supply for adults by the end of July. And I'm pleased to announce today, as a consequence of the stepped-up process that I've ordered and just outlined, this country will have enough vaccine supply, I'll say it again, for every adult in America by the end of May. By the end of May. That's progress, important progress.
By May, it's pretty close. Every single day, over 1 million Americans are getting vaccinated. This, combined with the millions of Americans who've already had coronavirus, means we're getting closer to herd immunity every day. And like I said the last time I talked about this, part of the problem in the beginning of the pandemic was that people and policymakers didn't understand exponential growth. That's how we went from Larry Kudlow in February 2020 to saying that the virus is contained to a full-blown lockdown in the state of New York 2 weeks later. The reverse psychology also applies, which is that after a year of failed policy, of terrible politics, and of an extended weird half-isolation that people have basically been living in for like 6 months, we are actually here. Things are exponentially better every single day. More vaccines, less cases, less death. The weather is beginning to get better. It's time to start acting like it, because the gravest problem we face now is politicians and public health officials who are forgetting their role, which was getting us out of this in the first place, not staying this way forever. Last time I discussed a very disturbing media campaign, which was led by public health officials like Dr. Fauci, which emphasizes over and over again all of the things that we can't do, like the famously always correct WHO, saying the pandemic won't be over in a year. Or even Joe Biden, who says his hope is everything is somewhat back to normal also by the end of next year. Or Dr. Fauci, who says maybe we'll be wearing masks as late as 2022. Each of these statements belies the urgent problem America is beginning to face, which is that we, in a matter of a week or two, will be at a place where supply will far outstrip demand. Many people who are or otherwise on the fence about getting a vaccine are internalizing a false message, which is that things won't change even if you take it. So why take it and bother getting a fever for like 24 hours, especially with experimental technology? It's a difficult question and a fair one. I genuinely understand it. The answer is this: because taking it gets us closer to herd immunity every single day, and it means you won't die from coronavirus. And the closer that we get, the more we can go outside and see each other and lift restrictions without having to worry about COVID at all for the elderly or ourselves. Life is awesome, and the key to living it fully again is the peace of mind that getting the vaccine gives you and achieving herd immunity. And yet, it basically is me and a few other people online who are even saying this. people actually in charge are being incredibly irresponsible by, again, making it seem as if the vaccine is not the miracle technology that it actually is. Take Governor Andrew Cuomo's press conference yesterday. In between dodging questions about his nursing home scandal and his own personal conduct, he says he was going to comply with CDC guidance that domestic travelers will not be required to quarantine or test out after 90 days of vaccination. 90 days? What? That's an insane figure. Everything we see right now amongst the millions of people vaccinated says none of that is necessary. And to bring it full circle, this is where trust the science as a meme is the problem. Where did the 90-day figure come from? Yeah, the CDC. And as Josh Barrow, who is a liberal, points out, the CDC is only hurting its own credibility when it puts stuff out like this that people are actually going to use to form government policy, which will affect millions of us. And before the inevitable Saagar doesn't believe in science or trust the CDC takes roll in, let me give you an example of some CDC guidance I guarantee that you don't abide by. Example number 1, all steaks should be cooked to medium and all burgers should be well done. Well, that's heresy as an American, I can say, for one. Or here's another one. All eggs should be always thoroughly cooked through. That is good news for me because I think runny eggs are disgusting. But many people in my life break CDC guidance every day of their lives. The point isn't to denigrate the CDC. It's this. Politicians, both in Texas and in New York, need to make reasonable decisions around the rapidly changing conditions that we have and not unthinkingly follow anyone just because the culture war dictates that we do so. The consequences are much more dire than we might think. If even 10% more people get vaccinated because of a change in communication, that is millions and millions of our citizens and more herd immunity for us all. It is time for everyone to start thinking more clearly. That 90-day figure is absolutely crazy, Crystal. And the reason and I'm glad, I even see Matt Iglesias, again, people on the left, Josh Barrow, who are like, listen, this is insane. The CDC is like, yeah, please cook all of your steaks, medium. No, I'm not going to do that. I will be willing to take that risk.
So wait, what are they saying? Yeah. 90 days after you're vaccinated?
90 days post-vaccinated. You won't be required to test out and quarantine when you're in the state of New York because they have this entire thing around people coming in and
So they're
out.
Implying that it's only works for 90 days?
Oh, no, they're saying even 90 days after you get vaccinated, we still have to act as if everything is still if you haven't been vaccinated. And I'm like, this is completely crazy.
Okay.
I know somebody just went to New York. The cops literally came to their door to make sure they were staying inside of their hotel room. It's not a joke. And again, these are all things where I understand where it comes from. Yes, Trump legitimately did ignore science in many ways, encouraged mass reopenings when it wasn't necessary and before anything was clear. But as with Texas, they're like, masks off, everything's open. I don't know. I think mask off actually is probably a terrible policy. But again, it's turned into a right-wing culture thing.
Well, you're asking for nuance.
Yeah.
And that's just not something we're apparently capable of.
So but nuance will stop people from getting vaccines. That's the biggest problem there.
Well, and so you have Josh Mandel, who's out in Ohio running for Senate, who's like, I'm going to take my mask off. Of course I'm not going to wear a mask the second that I'm able to. Right. Texas totally reopening. And then you have the other people on the other side who've made a whole identity around their pandemic compliance and this and so they sort of have an identity investment in keeping this thing going forever. And I do understand the instinct to temper people's expectations, but it's kind of a political maneuver because what they're really doing is they don't want to face a backlash if ultimately, things don't get back to, if the variant says something happens, which something could happen, the variants are worse and they get out of control, one of them jumps the vaccine, whatever, and so things aren't back to normal this summer or this fall, they don't want to take political heat over that. So they're trying to set expectations low, but in doing that, you're having the unwitting effect of convincing some people on the margins, I think, that this vaccine isn't worth getting. As we discussed before, there's a core group that there's nothing you can really say. They don't believe in it. They're mistrustful. They may or may not have good reasons for being mistrustful, and it'd be very hard to reach those people. But you got young people who are just like, nah, it's not really worth it. I might get sick. It won't really change things anyway. Either I'm already flouting the guidelines and hasn't really made that much of a difference in my life, or they're still saying I have to be on lockdown, so it won't make a difference in my life. And so to them, it's sort of not worth it. And those are the people who on the margins, I think your minds could change if you emphasize the positive benefits. The one other thing I'll say about this is conservatives, and I think rightly at this point, have been, and I should say, I guess libertarians, have been rightly outraged at the fact that a lot of schools, especially with young kids, have continued to be closed.
Yeah.
And I think at this point, given the data and the science that we've seen and the fact that it is on the wane and all of that, it is time for schools where young children go to be reopened. Part of what would give people the comfort to do that is if you have widespread vaccinations and herd immunity, because, that's what we're relying on to protect people who are unable to get this vaccine. That's the other part of this that I always think about. It's a social responsibility because, you may be healthy, you may be young, you may be unworried about getting the coronavirus, but there are people who aren't able to get the vaccine because they're immunocompromised or for other reasons. They're relying on you to get it to help keep them protected. That's what herd immunity is all about, that you're going to have certain people who, for whatever reason, cannot get the vaccine, and so they're dependent on the rest of society to comply and get it ultimately in order to keep them safe. And that's who you're really putting at risk.
Yeah, it is. And it's like I said, with a lack of nuance is having a dramatic effect. Because, yes, there is a certain segment of this population which will never get a vaccine. It's okay. That's their right. It's America. But what the point is there is that by not communicating this effectively and by making it seem as if everything's going to be locked down forever, people are going to say, why should I get it then? If my life isn't going to get demonstrably better, all public health communication should be geared towards one single message. Your life will dramatically improve by getting this vaccine. And it's like I said, on the margins, 10%, that's a lot of people. That's 10% of America is millions and millions and millions.
Makes
that's even more people paired with the natural immunity from a lot of people who have already had COVID. You're at herd immunity within April. And, I just see like the bar setting and the way the public health officials and many others are treating this. All sides really is just hurting the case dramatically. It really is terrible because we will soon, I'm sure I'll be doing a segment 2 or 3 weeks from now about how there are unfilled vaccine appointments all across the country, all because of a lack of communication.
I want one of those.
Yeah, give me one. I'm ready.
I'll take
all right,
one.
Time for Team Rising. Don Calloway, Gabby Orr, they're going to join us for discussion when Rising returns.